In this lesson, we're going to start working with LUTs. Now, before we do that, let's talk about what a LUT is. First of all, LUT stands for lookup table. It's basically an algorithm, and that's kind of a fancy way of saying it's math. Now, don't be afraid when you hear the word math, because the work is already done for you. One of the things that can make an image look better is capturing a greater dynamic range, which means that between the darkest and the lightest area, there's more stops. So for instance, if a normal camera might have maybe 8 stops as its dynamic range, it's okay, but if you can get more in there, it's even better. And that's what these cameras do. They get about 13 to 14 stops of dynamic range, but to do that, they actually have to compress the luminance and saturation chrominance information to fit into the same amount of data. So what they do is they crunch it, and they use this smart logarithmic scale so that they can retain the details in the highlights and not lose all the details in the shadows. Well, when you look at this footage out of the camera, it usually looks pretty flat. As a matter of fact, you'll hear the terms, this video was shot flat, or it was raw. And what you need to do is apply the same math formula to this flat image to uncrunch it, to make it look the way it did originally. And that's exactly what you're doing with these LUTs, with these lookup tables. Now, built into Premiere Pro are many, many lookup tables for some of the most popular cameras that people are using. So let's go ahead and apply a LUT to this image. If you look at this image, it does appear rather flat and unsaturated. I shot this with a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, and I intentionally shot it flat so that I would have greater dynamic range to work with. So I'm going to go ahead, make sure that the clip is selected. I'll move over to my Lumetri Color Effects panel, and you'll notice at the very top there's a section called Input LUT. And if I click on that drop-down menu, I'm presented a list of all the LUTs that are already installed in the application. And as you can see, some of the most popular cameras are available here. The ARRI cameras, the Blackmagic cameras, whether you shoot Canon, Nikon, or a GoPro, and even cameras such as the Panasonics and the Red cameras are all built in to the application. So since I shot this with a Blackmagic camera, I actually used the ProRes S-Log profile to compress the image. So I'm going to apply that same lookup table to uncompress it. You'll notice that it will go from flat to a much bolder image, and I want you to watch what happens to both the image and the different waveforms once I apply this LUT. You'll notice immediately that the image pops. The blacks are nice and rich and deep. I have more saturation, and the image looks really good. But you don't stop at the LUT. This is a starting point, because I now will take this image and tweak it so that it's perfect to my eye. So for instance, I might go ahead and open it up a little bit, open up the exposure, and then bring down my black levels. Add a little more saturation, and for right now it's pretty good. We've learned already many of the techniques to correct an image, but by applying this LUT, I'm already ahead of the game. Now I want to point out that one of the great things about working with Premiere is that I can apply a LUT to the clip in the timeline, but I can also apply a LUT to the master clip. So for instance, if I go over here and click on Master, it loads the master into my source panel. I can go ahead, apply that same LUT, and what will happen is all the time, and what happens is every shot that's inside that clip will already have the LUT applied. Now if you notice on the right side, it got overdone, and that's because I've already applied the LUT in the master, so I definitely don't want to apply the LUT in the clip in my timeline. So I'll go back to none in that case. So that's a good understanding of how you can use the LUTs that are already built into Premiere Pro. But what about if the LUT isn't available? What if they don't have it because it's a new camera, or it's just one of the many styles of shooting, or perhaps the manufacturer has released new lookup tables that you can apply. Well, that's not a problem because in addition to the preset LUTs, you can also load any LUT file you want. As a matter of fact, any .cube file can be easily loaded. Now, these can be given by the manufacturer, or they can be created in applications such as Photoshop, SpeedGrade, Resolve, and many others. So I've already built a LUT that I want to use, and I want to use it on this next clip over here. This clip was shot with a Sony a7S, and again, I shot flat, but I want to really make it rich, so I'm going to apply a LUT that actually I found on the internet. And there's a lot of folks out there creating lookup tables and putting them up. Usually it's a sharing environment, and you can go ahead, download them, and try them out on your footage. And that's exactly what I did. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on Browse. And the LUT that I found that I liked has kind of a Kodak film look, and it's applied to the A7S, and it is S-Log. So I simply can click on that, I say Open, and the LUT is applied. Now I can turn that off and turn it on, and you see this image is already much richer. But again, it's just a starting point because perhaps I want to go ahead and I want to bring up the shadows just so I see a little more detail. And perhaps I want to bring down the highlights just a hair so the sky's nice. And then I'm going to go ahead in my creative and I'm going to sharpen this image because I want it to pop a little bit and maybe even play with the vibrance. Now, why did I just do all this? Because you know how to do this already. Well, I did this because once I've modified this LUT and modified my color effects, I can now export this as a brand new LUT that I can then email off to somebody, or I can apply it to other clips that I might have shot in this environment. To export this, I simply go to the drop-down menu at the top of the Lumetri color panel, and I go ahead and I can export a .cube file. Now you'll notice there's also a .look file. We're actually going to explore that in the next lesson when we start applying looks to our footage. But if I export it as a .cube file, this can be imported into most any other color grading program as well as back into Adobe Premiere. So I would simply say export cube file, choose the location, give it a name. I'm going to give the name Sony A7 Night Shot, and I'm going to go ahead and just drop it right on top of my desktop into this area called Sony LUTs. I'll save it, and I'm all set to work with this in the future. As a matter of fact, if I wanted to apply this to this clip again, and I'm simply going to match frame and bring the same clip back into my timeline. So now I have the clip in my timeline with none of the modifications of the original LUT or my tweaks, but I'm going to go to basic corrections, and this time I'm going to browse, and in that folder where I had the original one, I have my new .cube file, and I'm going to open that, which will apply the LUT to this clip. And you'll notice that if I step back and forth between these two clips, that not only are the values of the original LUT applied, but all the sharpening and nuance tweaks are applied also. Don't expect to open up any panel and see those sliders in their new position because the LUT itself has applied all of this math under the hood, and when you're looking at all your other adjustments, they start off as neutral. There's one last thing I want to show you that you can do once you've created a specific look. I'm going to go back over to our earlier shot because this is the one with the LUT and the nuanced adjustments. And now if I go up to the top panel, I can actually save this as a preset. And by saving it as a preset, it will actually store all of this information in my effects panel for easy access. So I'm going to say Save Preset. I'm going to call it New York City Night. I'm going to say OK. And when I step over into my effects panel, you'll notice that in my presets, I have New York City Night as a preset. And I'm going to go back here, remove all of my effects so I can get the vanilla clip again. And now I'm going to apply the preset that I created onto this clip. And what you'll notice is it looks exactly the way I want it to, just like the previous one, but the difference between this preset and just using a custom LUT is you'll notice that the adjustments that I made to the original image are applied. And if you look back here at the basic correction, it actually shows the original LUT. So there's a lot of power here, and whether you are using an existing LUT that comes bundled with the program, one that you've downloaded from the internet, or one that's been created for you specifically, as well as presets, you can see you can make quick work of your color grading.